Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Thursday, June 5th, 2025, and today we are going to be taking a look at the presidential election for the 2028 election year. We are 3 years away from the presidential election being in full swing, and I know it seems early, but it is definitely worth talking about what the Democratic pathway might be to reclaiming the White House in just around 3 years. Now, it's interesting because there's been a lot of conversation about who might be running for president, but not enough conversation about how that person might become president. I see a lot of people talking about people like Pete Buttigieg, who has been very clearly very active on the political campaign trail. Maybe Vice President Kamala Harris wants to run for president again. You know, all of these different conversations are being had about which candidates might be running. But I think there's worth in taking a look at the current state of electoral politics, coming off the 2024 presidential election, looking at it from a new lens, looking at it from the where we are right now in terms of the upcoming midterms, and really just dissecting on a state-by-state basis, where is the Democratic pathway to an electoral college majority in just around 3 years? And so I think, too, beyond the point of just looking at this pathway, another important thing is understanding that the past few presidential elections have largely mimicked one another. And I'm not just saying that because 2016 and 2020 had identical, electoral vote shares for each political party, just flipped from one election to the other. But I'm more so saying it because the type of electoral college that we were working with in 2016 was radically different than that of 2012, but not too different than that of 2024. And so since Donald Trump has been mainstream in American politics for the past decade, it is worthwhile to really look at where Donald Trump has reshaped the electoral map, what happened in 2020, what happened in 2024, and what that means for Democrats moving forward. Now, of course, every video that we start talking about where Democrats are going to do well, where Republicans are going to do well, we have to understand that a lot of it really does depend on the battleground states that form over the next 3 years. And I think that while 2016, 2020, and 2024 had a very similar tone to it, I think they had a very similar tone because Donald Trump was on the ballot. And barring a constitutional amendment, that isn't going to happen this time around. Now, one thing is pretty standard across all of my electoral maps, though, and that is safe states. These are safe states that are solid for Democrats, solid for Republicans, that we know at baseline will not be going to the opposition party. And a lot of those you can tell. Based on the last presidential election, we actually have sort of a heat map here, or just a ratings map of lean states, likely states, tilt states, and safe states. And all the safe states are states that are characterized as being won by Kamala Harris by 15 points or more. And there really aren't that many differences from year to year. The big one and big notable absence from the safe map here is what was a safe state in 2020, New Jersey, narrowed down to being a likely state of 5.9%. So New Jersey, a lot closer than people expected, certainly going to be worth talking about in the next presidential. But looking at Washington, California, Hawaii, Illinois, a lot of these states too. Illinois actually is a bit more tricky coming off the last presidential. But what I will say too, again, this entire thing is really going to be about how Democrats have their pathway forward. In order to win the next presidential election, they are going to need to rival those numbers of Biden in 2020. And so a 10.9% margin for Illinois isn't going to cut it if you are trying to win on the national level. So what you're going to need are those Biden-esque numbers from 2020, or even the Obama numbers from 2012 in these safe Democratic states. And so what that looks like is that in 2028, it's going to require a locking down of states that might traditionally not be as locked down coming off that last election. New York was a lot closer than people had anticipated. It was a 10-point margin when you take a look at the map, or 12.6% rather, closer to being in that margin range than it should have been. And so Democrats certainly came off that year hoping that things might look better, but if they are to win, this is a standard. They must be able to win in the areas that have previously been very locked in for the Democratic Party. That is a must. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. The thing about New Jersey, though, I think because it has seen a 10-point shift in 4 years, it's going to get a little bit of time before it actually moves back into being locked in for the Democrats. I also want to remind us that back in 2012, when Obama was winning nationally by 332 with 332 electoral votes, New Jersey was only 17.7%. And I say only because Biden, who won by less in 2020, won it by 15.9. So really, if Democrats are to win nationally speaking, they could eke by not winning it by a safe margin. But some of those other states, like Delaware, like Connecticut, like Rhode Island, that are on the cusp of being safe Democratic states, absolutely need to be locked back down. And so what that brings Democrats to without New Jersey is 167 safe electoral votes. And so I know that might be interesting to see. I will admit there should be an addition here. Colorado, which went to Harris by 11 points. More likely than not, in a Democratic victory year, you'd be seeing it going back to where it was closer in 2020. But seeing the national swing being roughly 6 points, Colorado swinging by only 2.5 probably means that the next time around, it's going to be a pretty safe state for Democrats. So Colorado boosts Democrats to 177. The flip side on this is that Republicans have their own fair share of safe states too. Not Colorado, that was a misclick. But you'll find that states like Idaho and Utah are states that are going to be pretty locked in for the Republican Party. Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, South Carolina, and Missouri. Nebraska at large. Nebraska's third. Nebraska's first. Maybe not Nebraska's first, and maybe not Kansas by the margin you're thinking. 16.1 could see a narrowing down. Nebraska's first wasn't safe the last time around, so let me go ahead and move that out of the characterization, but you get the gist. These states are going to be pretty locked in. And so when I talk about, 2024, 2020, and 2016, the reason I really want to mention, too, that Donald Trump really did evolve the electoral map is that coming off 2012, Democrats were competing in far more states than they were competing in 2016 and 2020 and 2024. Democrats had just come off in 2012 of keeping states like Indiana at bay, right? Not necessarily Romney won it by 10 points, but they had won it the election prior. But it's more so, too, that Democrats were also competing in states like Iowa, winning it by 6 points, states like Ohio, winning it by 3 points, states like Florida, winning it by a point. These were states that Democrats could conceivably win by margins of 1, 2, 5 points, but that was entirely taken away by Donald Trump's campaign in 2016, and since then has not returned. And so what that means is the Democratic pathway to an electoral college victory does not lie through Iowa, it does not lie through Ohio, it does not lie through Florida, and it also does not lie through Texas. It makes it very difficult to see, Democrats having a really expansive electoral map. Chances are they're not passing what Biden got in 2020 and 2028, barring a more bigger collapse amongst the GOP, which we just simply aren't seeing at this point. It's early, but we aren't seeing it at this point. It would require, Republicans are going to win Nebraska at large. Nebraska's first. They're going to win Alaska. But what this also means, too, is the Democrats are going to have to fight back. They're going to have to win in Maine by a likely margin. They're no longer going to have low single-digit margins in New Hampshire. It's going to have to go back to where it was in 2020, if not higher. They're going to have to win Nebraska second. They're going to have to win Minnesota by more than 4 points, despite having the vice presidential candidate being from the home state on the ticket, right? They're going to have to do better in states they might not have done as well and had Tim Walz not been on the ticket. Obviously, going to have to capture New Jersey. They're going to have to capture Virginia, and they're going to have to capture New Mexico. And where does this bring us? No shock to anyone, brings us back to the same battleground states as before. Again, I think New Jersey will be more heavily competed in by the Republican Party, but in this set of circumstances that we're talking about, a Democratic pathway to an electoral college victory, they are going to have to already have that state in the column. And so this brings us down to the 7 battleground states and Maine's 2nd District, which ended up going to Trump by a margin in 2024, you can see here, by roughly 9 points. In 2016, it was nearly identical, right? 10.3%. So there was a bit of reversion there. Trump won it by 7 in 2020. So about a 1.5% increase for Trump, not at all what we saw on the national level. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that while Trump did rewrite the electoral map, his influence extends to states like Maine on a limited basis, right? Republicans aren't doing that much better because Donald Trump has flipped this 2nd district from being a longtime Democratic stronghold, which means that looking at it from the perspective of a viable Democrat, an electable and strong Democrat, Maine's 2nd district could be narrowed down. And so again, that's all speculative. We'll talk about it. It's not going to go to the Democrats, but they could keep it a little bit closer because I do not think that Donald Trump's direct appeal translates immediately to someone like J.D. Vance or immediately to someone like Marco Rubio. Do I think that he wins and they win all of the states that Trump won last time that are in that likely margin, like Iowa, like Ohio, like Texas, like Florida? Yes. I think Democrats have still lost major ground amongst minority voters and white working class voters in different regions across the country that at this present moment, a pathway to victory does not rely, nor does it invite them in this time in a way that seems easy to pick out. In 2020, it was a lot easier. In 2017, and actually what are we at? 2017, 2025, 8 years, 8 years of creating content for you guys. June 7th in 2 days. That'll be a huge day, actually, really exciting. Getting it a little bit derailed here. The point is that in 2017, it was very clear the Democrats were going to do better in 2020. it's not immediately clear that Democrats will do better in 2028. And so that's where the big difference is, that coming off the 2016 election and coming into a very unpopular Trump won, coming into a very solid and locked-in set of polls for a year and a half for Democrats in the generic ballot, it was clearer that the American public was more inclined to vote for a Democrat the second time around when they were faced with the opportunity. The third time around, they obviously voted for Trump, and it's not clear how they will vote the next time. And so I don't think we're going to see Iowa pull down, Ohio pull down. What I do think, though, from the likely column from the last cycle is that Arizona will be closer. I think that it'll be a state the Democrats are going to look to as an opportunity. If the border is not in a better place, if the perception on Trump is in a worse place, if Republicans aren't doing as well, if they could mimic or replicate what Ruben Gallego did and Republicans nominate someone who performs as poorly as Carrie Lake, all of these different questions, all of these different set of circumstances that could result in Arizona being closer. I do think it'll be closer without Donald Trump on the ballot, but still, 94 electoral votes, there's multiple pathways to the presidency. And so what I do think is going to be the most clear-cut way for Democrats to win in 2028 is through a Midwestern strategy. And the reason I say that is because it was the least elastic part of the electorate. And I think that there is another state, too, that certainly was, inelastic as well, and that was Georgia, which we'll talk about. But when looking at the shift map between 2016 and 2024, but more specifically 2020 and 2024, an election that Democrats won versus an election that Democrats lost, you will see that states like Wisconsin shifted by 1.5. When on the national, shifted from 4.5% victory for Biden nationally. You can see that in the popular vote margin to a 1.5% victory for Trump in the popular vote margin. That's a 6-point national shift. That was only 1.5 in Wisconsin. In contrast, 5.8 in Arizona. Michigan, a state that Trump was able to swing by 4.2%, that was the more elastic one, and we'll talk about why it might not be an entirely through and through Midwestern strategy. Maybe, right, if we could see Gretchen Whitmer on the ballot, but the thing about Michigan there is that there was a huge collapse in support for Democrats in Detroit. Democrats in Dearborn, you saw a lot of people protesting Kamala Harris over the war in Gaza. You saw a lot of people on college campuses. Similarly, in Michigan, it was one of the prime states where we saw the uncommitted movement was as strong as ever, and it translated to Donald Trump doing even better in Michigan than people expected. Point is, though, pretty big swing. Pennsylvania, 2.9%, again, in contrast with Nevada's 5.5% swing, and some other states too, right? We saw Texas swing 8 points, Florida swing 10 points, so pretty big swings across the country. In other states the Democrats had hoped would narrow up or would be a little bit closer did not end up being the case in 2024. But here's the thing. Wisconsin, Pennsylvania should give Democrats some hope, because outrunning the national swing by 3 points, sometimes 4.5 points, is notable. It cannot be ignored. Michigan, though, is one that I think will be tricky, because Democrats could win it back. Don't get me wrong. With someone like Shapiro or Whitmore or Wes Moore or whoever it might be, or Buttigieg, in the right circumstances, if the White House is in complete and total collapse and Vance is unpopular, almost anyone could win in the Midwest. But Michigan might not be the first target. Very likely be Wisconsin. Then it'd likely be Pennsylvania. But then I think it would actually shift over to Georgia. And hear me out. I know it seems weird. Georgia voted for Trump in 2016, barely for Biden in 2020, and then back to him in 2024. But the margins are what matters. And that's where I'd bring up the 2016 to 2024 map. Wisconsin got redder, Michigan got redder, Pennsylvania got redder, Nevada certainly got redder, first time a Republican won it since 2004, Arizona got redder, but Georgia got bluer. Yes, in a day and age of 2024 where Trump won the national popular vote despite losing it 8 years prior, won in almost every single battleground state, including states he did not win in 2016 by larger margins than 8 years prior, Georgia was the shining star for Democrats. North Carolina got narrowly closer, but Georgia really takes it away because it was 3 points more Democratic than the 2016 election. Which means, in a hypothetical, if Republicans were to, let's say, win a number of states that they won last time, but not by the same margins, Arizona got closer, Nevada gets a little bit closer, what we might find is that the Democratic pathway to victory would lie through Wisconsin, it'd lie through Pennsylvania, and maybe it'd lie through Georgia, with Michigan voting red. Now, here's what I think. As has been the case for the past 28 years, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania have voted together. I'd be more likely to say Michigan votes blue, maybe a little bit more narrowly than the other states, and Georgia joins them, rather than Michigan goes before Georgia. But weirder things have happened in American politics. Looking at the 2024 election results, you might be shocked to know that Michigan, as a state, that Donald Trump won by 1.4, only rivaled Georgia by 0.8%. in true terms, it could have been negligible the way that the states voted. Michigan could very well have been slightly more Republican than Georgia, crying out loud. I mean, it's a crazy set of circumstances. Pennsylvania and Georgia were 0.5% off. And so while I do think that it is more likely than not that Michigan votes with Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, I wouldn't be shocked if it ended up being a map that looked a little bit more like this one in the next presidential election, talking about a set of circumstances that narrowly gets the Democratic Party to victory. But chances are, I think we're closer to this map than the other one in 3 years' time, assuming things pan out the way they are panning out. Things could go better for Democrats, but it's probably going to be a close presidential election yet again, and it'll be interesting to see how the midterms reshape our understanding. But right now, this is where I think Democrats have their most likely pathway to the presidency in 2028. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2028 presidential election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.